The room was a symphony of sterile white and blinking monitors. Victor Ardent sat hunched over a slab of reinforced glass, his gloved hands trembling as he worked under the cold light of his lab. The silence was only interrupted by the faint hum of machinery and the occasional hiss of an airlock cycling in the distance. On the glass beneath him lay the fragile remains of a child's bone fragment, scorched and brittle, the final evidence of an unthinkable massacre. Victor's face, gaunt and shadowed from sleepless nights, reflected in the surface of the glass. He adjusted the high-powered magnifier over his eyes, every detail of the fragment filling his view. Lines that seemed random at first now formed patterns, something unnatural. "Soless!" he called, his voice hoarse. The AI materialized in the room as a holographic figure, an amorphous swirl of shifting geometric shapes, its voice smooth and calculated. "Yes, Victor?" "These sequences," Victor said, gesturing at the glowing screen displaying a series of DNA strands. "They're too deliberate. This wasn't random." Soless moved closer, its light reflecting off the fragmented remains like a ghost. "Elaborate." Victor sighed, frustration brimming in his tone. These children, they weren't just victims. They were targeted. Every one of them carried this genetic marker. He paused, his hand gripping the edge of the workstation. This wasn't a massacre. It was a cull. The weight of his words lingered heavy and suffocating. Soless tilted slightly, as though considering. If true, this implies forethought and fear. The question becomes, fear of what? Victor leaned back, his chair creaking under the shift. His thoughts spiraled, vivid memories crashing through his mind. Grieving parents clutching empty blankets, the broken wails of mourning that had become Earth's collective cry. He closed his eyes against the pain. They feared what these children could become, he murmured. The lab door hissed open, and Nyla Voss, one of Victor's closest confidants, stepped inside. Her face bore a similar exhaustion, but her sharp eyes scanned the room with unyielding focus. She dropped a datapad on the counter. "Victor, we've got a problem," Nyla said, her voice cutting through his thoughts like a blade. "The Empire's agents are closing in. They know you've found something." Victor met her gaze, his resolve solidifying. "Let them come. This is too important to bury." Nyla crossed her arms, her tone hardening. "You say that, but this isn't just your fight anymore. If they catch you, this information dies with you," Soless interjected, its voice coldly analytical. "She is correct. Current projections indicate a 74% probability of immediate lethal force upon capture." Victor stood, pacing the length of the lab. His mind raced, searching for solutions amid the chaos. The faint scent of burning polymers from nearby equipment filled the room, mingling with the metallic tang of the air. "What about transmitting the data off-world?" he asked, stopping mid-stride. Nyla shook her head. "Too risky. They've already locked down major comm relays. If we're going to move, it has to be physical. You need to get out of here." A loud crash echoed down the corridor, followed by the rhythmic pounding of boots. The lab trembled as an explosion ripped through a nearby bulkhead. The scent of smoke and scorched metal wafted into the room. "They're here," Nyla whispered, drawing her sidearm. Victor grabbed a small storage device containing the genetic data and pocketed it. His heart pounded, adrenaline sharpening every sensation, the cold grip of the data stick, the distant crackle of flames, the bitter taste of fear. "Soless, initiate lockdown protocols," Victor ordered. The AI's form flickered. "Lockdown initiated. However, time is limited. You must evacuate." The lab's reinforced doors slammed shut with a resounding clang, but it felt more like a temporary reprieve than a solution. The sound of gunfire echoed closer, sharp and relentless. Nyla gestured toward a hidden hatch near the far wall. "This leads to the maintenance shafts. It's not ideal, but it's better than staying here." Victor hesitated, his eyes scanning the room one last time. The remnants of the children, those tiny fragments of hope and promise, still lay on the workstation. He clenched his fists. "I'll be back for them," he vowed softly, his voice filled with an emotion that bordered on anguish. "You'd better survive first," Nyla shot back, pulling him toward the hatch. The tunnel was narrow and suffocating, the air thick with dust and oil. The dim emergency lights flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows along the walls. Soless's holographic form hovered faintly beside Victor, its presence a strange comfort in the chaos. As they moved deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels, Victor's thoughts churned. The Empire's fear of the genetic markers wasn't unfounded. The potential they represented was staggering. Strength, intellect, unity. But how far could humanity go before they became the very monster they sought to defeat? "Victor," Soless said suddenly, its tone uncharacteristically hesitant. "What is it?" he asked, glancing at the AI's flickering form. "Data analysis suggests an anomaly in the marker sequence. It appears incomplete, as though something vital is missing." Victor's brow furrowed. "Missing or deliberately hidden?" "Unknown," Soless replied. "Further research required." Before Victor could press further, the tunnel shook violently, debris raining from above. The sound of explosions grew louder, reverberating through the steel walls like thunder. "They're collapsing the access points," Nyla shouted over the noise. "We have to move faster." As they rounded a corner, a beam of light pierced the darkness, followed by the sharp bark of a command in an alien tongue. Empire soldiers blocked their path, weapons raised. "Get down!" Nyla shouted, firing her sidearm in a volley of controlled shots. The tunnel erupted in chaos, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of plasma fire. Victor dropped to the ground, his ears ringing. Soless's voice cut through the noise. "Victor, proceed to the junction ahead. I will provide a temporary diversion." Before he could protest, Soless projected a dazzling array of holographic decoys, their shimmering forms scattering down the corridor. The soldiers hesitated, their confusion buying precious seconds. "Go!" Nyla urged, dragging Victor to his feet. They sprinted toward the junction, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. The faint glow of an exit sign appeared ahead, a beacon of hope amid the darkness. As they emerged into the cool night air, Victor took a moment to breathe. The distant horizon glowed with the fires of destruction, the Empire's shadow looming large. "We're not safe yet," Nyla said, scanning the area. Victor nodded, clutching the data stick tightly. "But we're one step closer." Soless flickered beside him, its tone calm but insistent. "Victor, the data you carry is critical. However, survival will require more than knowledge. Are you prepared for what lies ahead?" Victor's gaze hardened, his resolve unshaken. "We have 800,000 reasons not to fail. Let's make sure they never forget." The cold night air clung to Victor's skin as he and Nyla sprinted toward a hidden transport nestled in the shadows of the industrial district. Above them, the remnants of Earth's cityscape stretched into the darkened sky, a patchwork of resilience and ruin. The faint hum of Empire patrol ships reverberated overhead, their searchlights carving jagged paths across the fractured buildings. Each breath Victor took felt sharp, weighted with the knowledge of what he carried and the danger pursuing them. "Almost there," Nyla muttered, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her voice was tight, restrained, as though she were holding back the full force of her panic. Victor clutched the data stick in his pocket, its weight heavier than its size justified. "Do you think they know exactly what we've found?" Nyla glanced at him, her expression grim. "They know enough to send half their agents after us. That's all that matters." Behind them, an explosion shattered the silence, its orange glow painting their shadows on the walls ahead. Victor stumbled, the shockwave rattling his senses. The acrid scent of smoke mixed with the metallic tang of fear, sharp and all-consuming. "Keep moving," Nyla snapped, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. The transport came into view, a sleek, camouflaged craft that hummed faintly as its engines warmed up. Soless materialized in the doorway, its flickering form emanating an eerie calm. "The Empire's forces are closing in. Departure is strongly recommended within the next 30 seconds, it said, its tone devoid of urgency despite the words. "Victor, get in," Nyla ordered, her eyes darting to the shadows. Victor hesitated for a fraction of a second, his gaze lingering on the city behind them. The thought of leaving the remains of those children, the fragments he had vowed to protect, gnawed at him. "Victor!" Nyla's sharp tone snapped him out of his reverie, and he climbed aboard. The transport's interior was dim, lit only by the faint glow of its navigation consoles. The walls bore the scars of countless battles, their surfaces etched with scratches and scorch marks. Victor sank into a seat, his breath shallow, his pulse still pounding in his ears. Soless's holographic form appeared beside him. "Your hesitation earlier suggests an emotional attachment to the remnants left behind. This attachment could impair your decision-making process." Victor shot the AIA glare. "It's not attachment, Soless. It's responsibility. Those remains are more than evidence. They're the last fragments of lives stolen from us." Soless tilted its form, as if considering his words. "Understood. However, sentimentality must not outweigh survival." Nyla's voice cut through their exchange. "Save the philosophical debates for later. We've got company." Through the viewport, Victor saw the faint glimmer of Empire ships in the distance, their engines burning bright against the night sky. His stomach tightened as the transport's engines roared to life, propelling them forward with a sudden jolt. The craft weaved through the city's skeletal remains, its hull rattling with every evasive maneuver. Victor's senses were overwhelmed. The acrid scent of burning fuel, the piercing whine of enemy ships closing in, the vibration of the floor beneath him. "We're not going to outrun them," Nyla muttered, her knuckles white as she gripped the controls. Victor looked to Soless. "Options?" The AI's voice was steady. "A nearby service tunnel network offers a temporary reprieve. Coordinates uploaded to the pilot's interface." Nyla veered the transport sharply, descending into the depths of the city. The narrow tunnels loomed ahead, their entrances like gaping mouths ready to swallow them whole. The craft plunged into the darkness, the walls rushing past in a blur of rust and decay. Sparks flew as the edges of the tunnel scraped against the hull, filling the cabin with the smell of scorched metal. Victor gripped the seat, his thoughts racing. "How long until they catch up?" Soless's form flickered. "Current trajectory allows for a 73-second delay before pursuit resumes." "That's not long," Nyla growled, her voice taut with frustration. Victor's gaze shifted to the navigation console, where a faint map of the tunnel network pulsed with a glowing trail. "Where does this lead?" "An abandoned colony sector," Soless replied. "Further analysis required to determine strategic value." Victor's brow furrowed. "Strategic value? What are you not telling us, Soless?" The AI hesitated, a rare pause that sent a chill down Victor's spine. "This sector was once an Empire research outpost. Its records may hold relevance to your findings." Nyla glanced over her shoulder. "You mean there might be more information about the genetic markers?" "Correct," Soless said. "However, the probability of hostile presence is high." Victor exhaled sharply, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "We don't have a choice. If there's even a chance that Outpost has answers, we have to go." The transport burst out of the tunnels into the sprawling remains of the colony sector. The once thriving settlement lay in ruins, its structures reduced to skeletal frames that clawed at the sky. The air was thick with dust, and the faint hum of distant machinery echoed eerily. Nyla set the craft down behind a collapsed tower, its shadow providing a semblance of cover. She turned to Victor, her expression hard. "We're exposed here. If this goes sideways, we won't have time to regroup." Victor nodded, his resolve firm. "Then we make it count." As they disembarked, the silence of the sector enveloped them, broken only by the crunch of debris underfoot. Victor's senses sharpened. The metallic taste of adrenaline lingered on his tongue, the faint smell of decay mixed with the dry, acrid air. Soless hovered beside him, its voice low. "Scans indicate the presence of dormant surveillance systems. Proceed with caution." Victor led the way, his heart pounding as they approached the remnants of the outpost. The building's facade was cracked and weathered, its entrance partially caved in. Nyla crouched beside the door, her weapon at the ready. "Let's hope whatever's in here is worth the risk," she muttered. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of rust and neglect. The faint glow of inactive monitors cast long shadows across the room, creating an atmosphere of foreboding. Victor moved to one of the terminals, brushing off a layer of dust. His fingers danced across the interface, bringing the screen to life. Rows of data scrolled across the display, their meaning buried in layers of encryption. "This will take time," Victor said, his voice tense. Soless hovered closer, its form flickering. "Allow me to expedite the process." As the AI interfaced with the terminal, Nyla's gaze swept the room. "We need to secure this area. If the Empire gets wind of us being here—" A faint sound interrupted her, metal scraping against metal. Victor froze, his pulse quickening. "Did you hear that?" Nyla raised her weapon, her movements deliberate. "We're not alone." Soless's voice cut through the tension. "Hostile entities detected. Prepare for engagement." The room plunged into chaos as the first shots rang out, their echoes reverberating through the outpost. Victor ducked behind a console, the acrid smell of plasma fire filling his lungs. Nyla returned fire, her shots precise and measured. "Victor, get that data now." Soless's voice remained calm despite the chaos. "Extraction process at 50%. Time to completion, 90 seconds. Victor clenched his fists, his mind racing. The battle raged around him, but he knew one thing for certain. The answers they sought were within reach, and he would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. The room crackled with static energy, the hum of Soless interfacing with the ancient Empire console, blending with the rapid exchange of fire. Plasma bolts seared the air, their acrid trails mingling with the metallic tang of the stale atmosphere. Victor ducked lower behind the terminal, his fingers trembling as he gripped the fragile data stick. "Victor!" Nyla barked from her position near the collapsed doorway, her sharp voice slicing through the chaos. "We're outnumbered here. Tell me you've got something." "I need more time," Victor shouted, his words barely audible over the shriek of incoming fire. "Time's a luxury we don't have," Nyla muttered, reloading her weapon. Her hands moved with practiced precision, though her gaze darted between the enemy and Victor, her resolve a thin veneer over growing desperation. Soless's voice was a disconcerting contrast to the frenzy, calm and analytical. "Extraction process at 70%. Recommend a defensive position to mitigate casualties." Victor exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He peered over the terminal, catching a fleeting glimpse of their attackers, Empire soldiers, their dark armor polished and menacing, advancing with relentless precision. They moved like shadows, their footsteps a drumbeat of impending doom. "We're pinned down," Nyla snapped, firing off a series of shots that ricocheted against the enemy's armor. The faint smell of scorched metal filled the air as the rounds landed ineffectively. "Soless, can you do anything useful for once?" "I am ensuring mission-critical data is retrieved," the AI replied flatly. "However, a diversionary tactic may be deployed if desired." "Do it," Victor said without hesitation, his voice edged with urgency. Soless's holographic form flickered, its amorphous shape transforming into a dazzling array of shifting lights. The display erupted outward, filling the room with an intricate web of glowing decoys. The soldiers faltered, their weapons hesitating on targets that didn't exist. "Now's our chance!" Nyla yelled, grabbing Victor by the arm. "Move!" They bolted for the rear exit, the sound of their boots pounding against the cracked floor, echoing in the cavernous space. The decoys bought them seconds at most, but in their world of razor-thin margins, it was enough. The corridor beyond was narrow and stifling, the air thick with the scent of damp metal and old circuitry. Flickering overhead lights cast jagged shadows, their inconsistent glow amplifying the disorienting labyrinth of walls around them. "This way," Soless directed, projecting a faintly glowing map. Nyla kept her weapon raised as they moved, her sharp eyes scanning every corner. "How do we know this isn't leading us into a trap?" "We don't," Victor admitted, his breathing ragged. Soless's voice, unbothered by doubt, responded. "The probability of survival increases by 21% if we proceed." Victor exchanged a brief glance with Nyla. Not the most reassuring odds, but better than nothing. They pressed onward, the faint sound of pursuit growing closer behind them. Victor's pulse quickened, the weight of the data stick in his pocket an unrelenting reminder of the stakes. His senses sharpened, each creak of the walls, every faint whisper of the distant machinery, felt like a harbinger of impending danger. Ahead, the corridor opened into a larger chamber. Victor hesitated as he stepped into the space, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The room was vast and circular, its walls lined with dormant monitors and alien symbols etched into the surfaces. "What is this place?" Nyla asked, her voice hushed, almost reverent. Victor approached the central console, his eyes scanning the strange glyphs glowing faintly across its surface. The symbols pulsed in rhythm as though alive, their light bathing the chamber in an otherworldly glow. "This isn't just a research outpost," Victor murmured, his voice tinged with awe. "This is something more ancient." Soless's holographic form reappeared, the lights in its shape flickering erratically. "Preliminary analysis indicates this facility predates the current empire by several centuries. Its purpose appears to be archival." "Archival?" Nyla echoed, her tone skeptical. "What are they archiving in the middle of nowhere?" Victor placed his hand on the console, the surface cold and unyielding. As if responding to his touch, the room shuddered faintly, and the monitors lining the walls flickered to life. Rows of data streamed across the screens, incomprehensible symbols morphing into recognizable patterns. A voice, low and mechanical, filled the room. "Access granted. Subject, Genomic Progression Initiative." Victor's breath caught. They were studying us. The data on the screens began to coalesce into images, maps of human DNA sequences, highlighted areas flashing in rapid succession. The realization hit Victor like a physical blow. "This isn't just about the children," he said, his voice trembling. "They've been monitoring humanity for generations, tracking changes in our genetics." Nyla's expression hardened. "So, the massacre was part of a bigger plan?" Victor nodded, his gaze locked on the screens. "They weren't just afraid of what we could become, they were trying to control it." Soless interrupted, its tone sharper than usual. "Warning, hostile forces entering perimeter. Immediate evacuation is advised." Nyla swore under her breath, turning toward the entrance. "How much longer do you need, Victor?" "I don't know," he snapped, frantically scanning the console. "There's too much here to process." The distant sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber, growing louder with each passing second. Victor's heart pounded, his mind racing through calculations and possibilities. Soless spoke again, its voice cutting through the rising tension. "Recommend data extraction and destruction of remaining files to prevent enemy acquisition." Victor hesitated, his hand hovering over the console. Destroying the files meant losing knowledge, answers to questions humanity had been asking for centuries. But leaving them intact risked handing the Empire the key to their domination. "Victor," Nyla urged, her tone sharper now, "we don't have time for a debate." With a deep breath, Victor inserted the data stick into the console. "I'm taking what I can. Soless, start the purge." The AI's form flickered, and the room erupted in a cacophony of alarms. The monitors displayed flashing red warnings, the data streaming faster as it was wiped from the system. The sound of boots was almost upon them now, the Empire's soldiers closing in. Nyla fired a warning shot into the corridor, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to go now!" Victor grabbed the data stick as the purge completed, the final remnants of the Empire's secret vanishing from the screens. Soless's form shifted, projecting a map of an alternate exit. "This way," the AI directed, its voice calm despite the chaos. As they sprinted toward the new path, the chamber behind them erupted in a series of explosions, the walls collapsing in on themselves. The heat of the blasts licked at Victor's back, the acrid smell of burning metal filling his lungs. The exit loomed ahead, a narrow tunnel leading to the surface. Victor pushed himself forward, every step fueled by a mix of fear and determination. As they emerged into the open air, the cool night breeze washed over them, a stark contrast to the fiery chaos below. Victor doubled over, gasping for breath, the data stick clutched tightly in his hand. "What now?" Nyla asked, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched on her face. Victor straightened, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "We find out what else they're hiding, and then we make them pay." Victor stood on the ridge overlooking the distant ruins of the outpost, the faint light of its dying fires flickering in the cool night. The data stick in his pocket felt heavier now, its contents a Pandora's box that could reshape humanity's course, or destroy it. The wind carried the faint scent of scorched metal and earth, mingling with the raw tang of his own sweat. Every step forward now required more than courage. It demanded precision, strategy, and a cold, relentless resolve. Nyla crouched nearby, her weapon resting across her knee. She stared out into the horizon, her expression unreadable. "What's the play, Victor? We've got half the Empire gunning for us, and no shortage of allies ready to turn their backs if things get too dangerous." Victor's jaw tightened. "We stop running. It's time we start turning their fear into our weapon." Nyla raised an eyebrow. "Bold. But do you have a plan, or are we improvising as we go?" Victor pulled the data stick from his pocket, holding it up against the starlight. "This holds the key. The Empire's obsession with humanity isn't just paranoia, it's calculated. They've been preparing for us to become something they can't control. We use that." "How?" Nyla asked, skepticism tinged with curiosity. Victor turned to her, his voice sharpening with conviction. "We dissect their tactics. Every experiment, every fear-driven decision they've made, it's all here. We'll study it, adapt it, and weaponize their own systems against them." Soless flickered to life beside them, its holographic form casting faint blue light on the rocky ground. "I have begun parsing the data. Initial analysis indicates patterns within the Empire's genetic suppression efforts. Recommendations for countermeasures will follow." Nyla snorted. "Countermeasures? We need more than defense if we're going to make them regret ever touching Earth." Victor nodded, his eyes narrowing. "We will. But brute force won't be enough. This has to be a war of attrition, of precision. We'll attack their infrastructure, unravel their alliances, and expose their weaknesses. By the time we're done, the Empire won't just fear us. They'll never recover." The planning began in a hidden alcove deep within the mountains. The space was a natural fortress, its walls of jagged stone towering over a network of caves illuminated by faint, bioluminescent moss. The air was cold and still, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. It was a place where the Empire's reach faltered, a rare sanctuary. Victor spread out a series of holographic maps on the rocky floor, each one pulsing with points of light representing key Empire installations. Nyla knelt beside him, her sharp gaze dissecting the visuals with a hunter's precision. "What's the priority?" she asked. Victor tapped one of the glowing points. "They're communication hubs. We sever their ability to coordinate across sectors. They'll scramble, their forces fragmenting under the weight of their own size." "And after that?" Nyla prompted, her tone laced with cautious approval. Victor's finger moved to another point. "Supply chains. Their fleets rely on centralized logistics. We hit their depots, cripple their fuel lines, let them starve while we watch." Nyla smirked. "Not bad for a scientist. You sure you don't have a little military blood in you?" Victor's lips quirked into a faint smile. "I've studied enough wars to know that victory isn't just about firepower. It's about patience, precision, and understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves." Soless interjected, its tone as measured as ever. "I have identified potential collaborators among the suppressed species within Empire-controlled territories. Diplomatic overtures could yield significant advantages." Victor's expression hardened. "Diplomacy isn't optional. It's critical. But we won't beg. We offer strength in return for loyalty. If they want freedom, they'll have to fight for it." Nyla leaned back, studying him with an appraising gaze. "You're not the same man I met a year ago." "I can't afford to be," Victor replied simply, the weight of his words settling between them. The first strike came days later, executed with surgical precision. Victor and Nyla infiltrated an Empire communications relay nestled within the ruins of an old mining outpost. The facility was heavily guarded, its perimeter bristling with automated turrets and patrols. Victor crouched behind a ridge, the faint glow of the facility's lights casting eerie shadows across the terrain. The cold bite of the night air stung his face, but he welcomed it. It kept him sharp. Beside him, Nyla adjusted the scope on her rifle, her breath steady and measured. "Ready?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Victor nodded, his focus unyielding. "Soless, give us the overlay." The AI's projection shimmered into view, mapping out enemy positions and weak points in real time. Primary vulnerabilities identified. Recommend simultaneous disabling of external power grid and central command systems. Victor glanced at Nyla. "You take the grid, I'll handle command." Nyla grinned, her confidence infectious. "You got it, boss." The operation unfolded in a series of calculated movements. Nyla's shots were precise, each one silencing a turret or disabling a patrol before they could raise the alarm. The faint scent of ozone lingered in the air as plasma bolts scorched their targets. Victor moved through the facility's corridors with practiced ease, his senses attuned to every sound and shadow. The walls hummed faintly with the energy coursing through the complex, a reminder of the immense power they were dismantling piece by piece. At the heart of the relay, Victor accessed the central console. The interface glowed with alien symbols, but Soless's guidance made quick work of the encryption. Data streams unfolded before him, revealing the Empire's communication networks in staggering detail. "This is it," Victor murmured, his fingers flying across the controls. "We cut their lifeline here." Soless's voice chimed in. "A timed disruption will maximize impact, creating prolonged disarray across multiple sectors." Victor set the parameters, his mind racing with the implications. "Do it!" The facility's systems whirred and sputtered as the relay's connection was severed. Alarms blared, their shrill cries reverberating through the corridors. "Time to go!" Nyla's voice crackled over the comm. Victor bolted for the exit, his heart pounding. The scent of smoke and burning circuitry filled the air as the facility began to self-destruct. He emerged into the night just as the first explosion erupted behind him, the force of the blast pushing him forward. Nyla was already waiting at the extraction point, her expression triumphant. "That'll send a message." Victor nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "And it's just the beginning." In the weeks that followed, Victor's strategy unfolded like clockwork. Each strike was meticulously planned, each move designed to dismantle the Empire's foundation without overextending their forces. Resistance cells across the galaxy began to rally, inspired by the precision and audacity of humanity's retaliation. But with every victory came greater risks. The Empire's response grew more aggressive, their forces converging on key locations with ruthless efficiency. Victor's resolve was tested, his every decision a balancing act between progress and survival. One night, as he studied the latest reports in the dim light of their mobile command center, Nyla approached him, her expression uncharacteristically soft. "You're carrying too much," she said quietly. Victor didn't look up. "It's my burden to carry." "It doesn't have to be," she replied. "We're in this together, whether you like it or not." Victor met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. "If we fail—" "We won't," Nyla interrupted firmly. "Because failure isn't an option, not for us, not for them." Victor nodded slowly, her conviction bolstering his own. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but the fire burning within him remained unquenchable. Humanity's vengeance was far from blind. It was deliberate, calculated, and unstoppable. Part 5. The Final Gambit. The room was dimly lit, the faint hum of machinery creating a constant undercurrent of tension. Victor stood at the head of the tactical table, his shadow stretching across the holographic map, flickering with the Empire's key installations. The air was thick with anticipation, carrying the faint scent of ozone from the numerous data terminals working overtime. His voice cut through the silence, steady and sharp. "We've crippled their communications and weakened their supply lines," he said, pointing to a sector glowing red on the map. "But this is where the battle will be won. Or lost." Nyla leaned against the table, arms crossed. The Imperium Nexus, heavily fortified, swarming with their elite. You're talking about storming the heart of the beast. Not storming, Victor corrected, his tone precise. Imploding. We won't hit them with brute force. We'll infiltrate, sow chaos from within, and let their own infrastructure devour them. Soless materialized beside the map, its glowing form casting faint shadows on the faces around the room. Data analysis confirms significant vulnerabilities in the Nexus's core systems. However, successful execution requires simultaneous disruption across multiple nodes. Victor nodded, his gaze sweeping across his team. Each face reflected a mix of resolve and weariness, the scars of their journey etched in their expressions. This is our moment. We've bled for this. We've buried our dead for this. And now we make it count. The plan was intricate, a web of precision and deception. 3 teams would infiltrate the Nexus, each targeting a critical system: power, command, and fleet coordination. Victor would lead the main assault on the command node, where the Empire's leaders operated. As they prepared for deployment, the room buzzed with quiet activity. Weapons were checked, final adjustments made to their gear. The scent of oil and metal filled the air, mingling with the faint whine of calibrating plasma rifles. Nyla approached Victor, her voice low. "You're sure about this?" "There's no other way," he replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Her gaze softened, a rare flicker of vulnerability breaking through her usual bravado. "Don't die on me, Victor. We still have a galaxy to rebuild." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "I don't plan to." The assault began under the cover of darkness, the team's sleek shuttles slipping through the void of space like whispers. The Nexus loomed ahead, a massive structure bristling with defensive turrets and glowing with the faint blue hue of its energy shields. Victor's shuttle shuddered slightly as it entered the shield's perimeter, the turbulence jolting him in his seat. The cold air inside the cabin carried a faint tang of fuel, a reminder of the precarious nature of their mission. "Steady," he murmured, his voice calm despite the tension coiling in his chest. As the shuttle landed in a concealed docking bay, the team disembarked in silence, their movements synchronized and deliberate. The air inside the Nexus was cooler, sterile, carrying the faint scent of machinery and disinfectant. Soless's voice crackled in Victor's earpiece. "Proceed to the primary corridor. I am overriding localized security feeds to mask your presence." Victor's team moved swiftly, their boots barely making a sound on the polished floors. The corridors were vast and imposing, the walls lined with intricate designs that seemed to hum with latent energy. At the first junction, they encountered their first obstacle, a patrol of heavily armed guards. Nyla signaled for silence, her fingers moving in precise gestures. Victor nodded, crouching behind a support column as she raised her rifle. The confrontation was quick and brutal. Nyla's shots found their marks with surgical precision, each burst of plasma lighting up the corridor with an eerie glow. The sharp scent of ozone and burning fabric lingered in the aftermath, a grim testament to their efficiency. "Clear," Nyla whispered, her voice steady despite the tension etched in her features. They pressed on, their path winding deeper into the Nexus. The structure seemed alive, its faint vibrations resonating through Victor's boots as they navigated its labyrinthine corridors. When they reached the command node, Victor paused, his gaze sweeping across the control room. It was vast and circular, its walls lined with consoles and displays that pulsed with data. At the center stood a massive holographic projector, its light casting long shadows that danced across the room. "This is it," Victor said, his voice low. As they moved into position, the doors behind them hissed open, and a squad of Empire soldiers stormed in. The air filled with the sharp crack of plasma fire, the acrid smell of scorched metal and smoke assaulting Victor's senses. "Hold them off!" Victor shouted, diving behind a console. Nyla and the others returned fire, their weapons lighting up the room with bursts of energy. Victor worked frantically, his fingers flying across the console's interface, as Soless guided him through the complex systems. "Primary systems compromised," Soless reported. initiating cascade failure. The room shuddered as the first explosions erupted in the distance, the Nexus's power grid collapsing under the strain of Victor's sabotage. The lights flickered, the once imposing command center descending into chaos. "Victor, we're out of time!" Nyla yelled, her voice cutting through the din. Victor inserted the final override, his heart pounding. "Done! Let's move!" They sprinted through the crumbling corridors, the sound of explosions and distant screams echoing around them. The air grew thick with smoke, each breath searing Victor's lungs as they raced toward their extraction point. The sight that greeted them, as they emerged onto the Nexus's exterior platform, was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The massive structure was ablaze, its glowing blue shields flickering and failing. The Empire's fleet, once a symbol of their dominance, was in disarray, ships colliding as the coordinated chaos rippled outward. Nyla glanced at Victor, her expression grim but triumphant. "We did it." Victor's gaze lingered on the burning wreckage, his voice quiet but firm. "Not yet, but we've made them bleed." As their shuttle lifted off, the Nexus collapsed behind them in a spectacular explosion, its debris scattering across the void. Victor watched in silence, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge of the battles yet to come. Humanity's vengeance was far from complete, but they had taken the first step toward a reckoning that would echo across the galaxy.